Whether you're an individual athlete, aiming for an Olympic medal or a world championship record, or whether you're a team athlete and doing that in a much more team-based environment, sport is more than you as an individual, and it's pushing yourself at the peak of what you can achieve. And each of us has got a different, level of potential, whether that's genetics, whether that's talent, whether that's effort, all of that. So I think it gets you out of your comfort zone. And I think that's the area. It's like when you're out of your comfort zone and when you're attributing full effort and focus to whatever you do, for me, it's about high performance, because I think that the same way you feel in sport, an artist might feel when they do the work of their life, a musician might feel when they write the best song they've ever written, yes, and they've performed to a crowd of 100,000 people. So actually for me, the magic ingredient in sport is that piece around high performance. And in sports psychology, it's talked about performing to the upper range of your capability as consistently as you can and thoroughly enjoying the process.
Yes.
And if you captured that in anything that you do, you're going to be hopefully really fulfilled. And I think it's about fulfillment. I've worked really hard at that, and whether I've met it or I've just felt short, I've put everything I've got into it. And you take that mindset for a young child and apply it to any industry, they're going to be successful.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to the latest episode of the CEO Retort. I'm your host, Tim El-Sheikh, and in this conversation, I am meeting the brilliant Professor Joe Maher, who's a Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Sport at Loughborough University and Professor of Practice in the School of Sport, Exercise and Health Sciences. Now, for those who don't know, Loughborough University is one of the world's leading institutions for sports technology, sports research, and they worked with multiple Olympic teams from around the world, not just the British Olympic team. So these are the absolute authority of sport, which is the reason why I've got connections with them, and I'm kind of building more relationships within that. So I'm going to talk more about that later. And she spent 10 years practicing as a sports psychologist as well, working with athletes across a range of sports from grassroots all the way to obviously Olympic standard. And she has been a member of the Football Association Council since 2019, serving on the National Game Board and chairing the Football Development Committee. But Joe also served as a chair of the English Colleges Football Association and director of Association of College Sport. And after 17 years career in further education, serving as a principal and CEO for 7 years at Boston College and Loughborough College, respectively. She's also built on Loughborough's sporting success, securing £12.5 million worth of funding for world-class sports hall and supporting 15 national sports governing body partnerships with over 2,000 elite athletes per year. I mean, pretty impressive stuff. I met Joe towards the end of 2024, where we both spoke at an event at Loughborough University. And her speech was just exhilarating. And I felt, I've got to meet her and talk to her one way or another. And she was gracious enough. And we actually met and had lovely conversations after that. And the thing that really inspired me to talk to Joe and invite her to this podcast is her passion and energy, which I'm sure you're going to feel through this conversation. She strongly believes in the idea of how can we use all of the principles of sport to benefit society as a whole. So this is not just about, serving athletes and aspiring athletes and children in school, etc., but everybody. And this is quite closely related to the episode that I published about loneliness and depression, something that I went through as an ex-pro athlete, because it's a rife problem within the worlds of sports. But I've also talked about how the journey I had through sport pretty much impacted everything that I do in my life, even as an AI entrepreneur for the past 20 years. And in fact, this podcast and the company that I'm building around this podcast is all inspired by the principles of sports as an athlete, in terms of believing in yourself, in terms of working hard, in terms of accepting failure, but also going for the win. All of these things matter in life, no matter what you do, whether you're a student, whether you're an athlete, it works every single time if you just go for it. That's the philosophy that absolutely works in anything and everything, not just sport. It's a philosophy that I effectively grew to understand from the age of 5 when I got into sports at a very high level. I started off with karate, basically at the competitive level. Then I didn't like it. Then I moved to basketball, which kind of where my passion grew towards professional sports. And I just understood what it takes to become a successful professional athlete Though, unfortunately, my success ended pretty abruptly with a pretty horrific injury, as I explained in that episode. And interestingly, Jo went through exactly the same sort of thing, only in football in her case. She's an ex-footballer. I know it sounds a bit of a cliche where you say, you do what it takes to succeed. But you know what? That is actually a fact. You've got to do what it takes. You've got to do all of the dirty work, the hard work, the painful work to achieve whatever it is that you want to achieve. And in sports, it kind of becomes part of your identity almost. Not necessarily the sport itself, but that work ethic. And sports is something that can be absolutely used as a way of inspiring people to do the same. And this is what Jo is brilliant at. And this is what our conversation is built on. And hopefully you'll see at the end of this that it doesn't really matter whether you're a professional athlete or not. It doesn't even matter whether you love sports or not. But that simple motto of doing what it takes to achieve whatever it is that you want to achieve is absolutely fundamental. Now, before we go any further, I want to give a massive shout out to our partners, Ground News, who are supporting this episode. As an entrepreneur, I like to follow the news really, really closely, be it in politics, the environment, health, fitness, and of course AI, which is my field of work. But the problem with the news sector today, that staying up to date with events around the world can be really, really difficult because it's impossible to consult a single source for the full story. The narratives that shape public opinion often just reinforce media and corporate-backed vested interest, and of course they push for whatever public or political biases of their readers. Not to mention, of course, they push a lot of clickbait stories to just attract clicks rather than trying to inform you properly. And this is why I fell in love with Ground News. Ground News is an app and website that combines news from around the world in one place so you can compare coverage. For every news source, you can see if they have political bias, how reliable their reporting is, and who owns them. And they've got this amazing tool called the blind spot feed, which highlights news disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum. I even see this with AI. For example, you'll see the left-leaning AI coverage tend to be kind of very doom and gloom. But then on the other side, with the right-leaning, AI is the savior of humanity and everything. I mean, it's quite ridiculous in both cases. So it's so important to have a tool like Blind Spot because it shows you the balance of this coverage so that you can actually see what the real story is, what's the crux of the story, which is super important, especially for somebody like me, because many customers around the world rely on me and my team to make sure that we inform them about AI and technology as accurately as we possibly can. But even for me personally, as somebody that likes to follow all the other stories, I want to make sure that my cognitive bias is in check. So check out this tool, it's absolutely phenomenal. You can subscribe through my link at ceoretort.com/ground news, one word, or scan the QR code that you can see on the screen right now if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, and you'll get 40% of their Vantage plan. It's the one that I use to get unlimited access to every single feature and tool that they have, and it works out less than $5 a month. It's basically like a cup of coffee a month. And your subscription not only helps our channel and our podcast, but it also supports Ground News as it makes the media landscape more transparent. They're not reliant on VCs, kind of like my company. They're absolutely 100% funded by their membership. So this is something that I really, really love about them as well. It's their level of independence. And I think we should all support companies like that to make sure that we stay informed as accurately as we possibly can. So check out the link at ceoretort.com/ground news, one word, or scan the QR code that you can see on the screen right now if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, and you'll get 40% of their Vantage plan. And tell me what you think. Do you like it? Is it working for you? I would love to get your feedback. So thank you, Ground News, for supporting this video. And now, without further ado, my friends, Professor Joe Maher. For those who follow me, they know that I've been involved with sports for quite a long time. And more recently, I started to engage with Loughborough University because it is one of the world's leading universities in sports. And I found out something very interesting today, which I didn't know, that apparently you are the first Vice-Chancellor for sports ever. And I thought to myself, I mean, Loughborough has been like I said, one of the leading universities in the world. So all that time they didn't have a chancellor for or vice chancellor for sports. So
yeah,
how did that happen?
University structures. So obviously every university has a chancellor. We've got Lord Sebastian Coe as our chancellor. The chancellor obviously is that they operate in a dignitary role, and they are strategic and supportive of the structure. Then you have like a vice-chancellor and president that runs the whole of the organisation, which is Professor Nick Jennings, and I'm the Pro-Vice-Chancellor for sport. But yeah, you're right. In terms of, we think a number of years ago there might have been one in Australia, but as far as we're aware at the moment, I think we're the only university in the world with a Pro-Vice-Chancellor for sport. So incredible honour and privilege to be in the role, and just really exciting time to be part of sport, and there's so much to do.
Yeah, I mean, well, with your background, I'm not really surprised, which obviously we're going to delve deep into. I also found out something else, that you used to run my old college, Boston College, Lincolnshire.
Oh, wow. Yeah, yeah, I did indeed. Yeah, I was chief exec and principal there for just under 4 years, which was absolutely brilliant. And when I moved from Boston to be the chief exec at Loughborough College, I left them where we closed down for lockdown on the Friday, and then on the Monday started at Loughborough. So it was a really, obviously globally, challenging time. But to walk out on your last day in a kind of college in lockdown was not how I would have liked to have moved on to the next role. But yeah, what a brilliant place, and there's some brilliant people still there, and I wish them really, really well. Yeah, no, definitely. I have lovely memories. That's actually where I met my wife. She hates me when I say this, but we're college sweethearts. College sweethearts. So yeah, that's just sad to say that. But anyway, to delve into your background, because that's actually the reason why I wanted to have this conversation. Because you've got background, obviously, as an athlete, but also in higher education. And there's quite a few issues we could talk about, we could talk forever. But one of the key areas that a tradition that we have in the podcast, I always like to ask people about their journey, about how their multiple backgrounds kind of somehow came together that led you to where you are today. Because I mean, a lot of our listeners are young entrepreneurs or people that just finished university and stuff like that. And I'm sure you've probably been told this many times as well, but a lot of young people tell me, they said, Tim, I don't know what to do with my life. I've got all this education, I've got degrees, blah, 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 but I have no idea where to go. And I always tell them, look, just try do different things and just go with the flow. Yeah, it's good to have a plan, but sometimes things kind of work out. And literally every single guest I've had so far, they have pretty remarkable, diverse backgrounds, and that kind of just somehow came together in a phenomenal way. So can you share with the listeners how your experience as an athlete, sports psychologist, and teacher led you to where you are today? Yeah, I mean, I can try. So I think for me, sport has just been my number one passion since the second I could walk, talk. I grew up on Liverpool Football Club, obviously the men's team when I was younger, the women's team. I don't even think the women's team had been formed then. And in particular, you wouldn't see me in the house, because every moment that I could be out kicking a ball around and playing football, that's what I was doing. The women's game was in a very, very different place back then. So at school, once you got, I think, to 7, you weren't actually allowed to play football at school. So actually all of my competitive energy went straight into netball. So I played netball throughout primary school and into secondary school, because I wasn't actually allowed to sign for a women's team till I was 16. So I had to sign for an external women's team, which back then was Warrington, who I think were in the league system is very, very different. So you used to have a Northern Premiership and a Midlands combination, very different structure with the Super League now. But Warrington were a pretty decent team back in the Northwest. I was signed for them at 16. And that really helped in terms of when I was applying to come to Loughborough, because, being competitive and playing in those leagues at the time, obviously at Loughborough, we want the best athletes in the country. I certainly wasn't one of them. But just by being, knowing that I would be contributing to the Bucks team. So back then it was the British University Colleges, and it was called BUSA. So we played in the BUSA leagues. Obviously, as a university, yes, we want to recruit, people that are going to go to the Olympics, but actually we have 6,000 students representing us every Wednesday in a really diverse and rich community. So we want to ensure that we create opportunities for all of them. So I was probably maybe different than some of your entrepreneurs, because I had a PE teacher, back then she was called Miss Rigby before she got married, who was like, I applied for Loughborough and I couldn't get into, you're going to Loughborough. So for me, it was like, you need to go to Loughborough. It's the best place for sports science. PE is everything that you do. go and get straight A's because that's what you're going to need. So I was motivated to come to Loughborough probably from about the age of 14, 15. I knew that I needed to get good GCSEs, work hard at A-level, and I just had a razor sharp focus on get the grade profile that I need to come and study straight sports science, and know that I could play football alongside my studies, know that I could hopefully help, build my network and career kind of from that. And it was at Loughborough that, unfortunately, I did my first major knee injury was at 16. So I had a tear in the meniscus, but it had caught behind the medial ligament. So the MCL had gone, the meniscus had gone. And back then, my mum and dad, I come from a working class northern family, but they knew that it would be 8 months wait for the surgery. So they helped and they paid privately, which was an incredible amount of money, at the time and for us. But they knew that if I came to Loughborough Uni kind of on crutches and completely injured, that was going to limit my ability to study sports science. So I did it maybe I was 17. I must have done it at 17 because the worry was I wouldn't have got through rehab by the time I came as a fresher. I had knee surgery then, which had recovered by the time I got to freshers trials. But then within my first probably, 6 weeks at uni, my shoulder dislocation happened and I ended up having shoulder surgery after that. And obviously I suffer from Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, so all my joints go at different times. So kind of, I would always get like 6 or 7 weeks under my belt of playing, and then I might be out for 6 weeks because I did a fracture on my fifth lumbar. I fractured my metatarsal. My knee went again, like literally. So, like for people of my generation, think about, when Darren Anderton was playing at Tottenham or Jamie Redknapp at Liverpool, that would be the running joke in terms of, I just couldn't sustain 3-4 month blocks of fitness. So was able to then I was helping out with coaching. I was on the athletic union, running as secretary. So I was still playing throughout my whole time at university, but I was trying to build those other leadership and associated skills alongside it because I did have a lot of time on the operating table on crutches. I'm 11 surgeries in for various things. So, it's quite a lot, considering my age to have had. And then obviously I had to make a permanent stop to sport at 25. That's when I had to go, I took a half volley in training in a shooting drill, unopposed, nobody near me, and my knee just completely came out. And I was like, if I can't even kick the football, never mind a tackle, we're pretty much done. So, but during my time at university, when I was in my final year, we had this guest lecturer come in that said, we're going to do a session on communication skills to do with sports psychology. And if you're interested, come to a workshop on the Saturday. And I've always tried to adopt just a yes approach. If someone offers an opportunity, say yes. So I went to the workshop on the Saturday on enhancing your communication skills, building your networks. And they just said, do you want to have a coffee next week? We think you could teach. And I was like, okay. Went for coffee and they said, right, fill out all this paperwork. We'll put you on a sessional hourly contract. You'll just do some shadow teaching in your first few weeks as cover because you've already got your degree, you're on your master's, and this is for level 1 and level 2 students. So that would be GCSE level. So a level 3 would be your A level and your vocational. These are students that had not done well at GCSE and needed some extra support. So I was going in and doing things like functional maths. I mean, my parents found this hilarious because I hated GCSE electronics at school. And I was doing sports development and started off just saying yes to, I'll cover that session. Yeah, I'll do that. So I was doing sessional teaching all the way through my master's, and then got to the end of my master's, handed my thesis in on like August the 13th and started at the college full time on the 15th. So kind of fell into it just by saying yes to people, turning up, showing up. And it was during that period of time when I started out at Loughborough College at 21 that I was able to build up my professional sports psychology accreditation and licensing. I'm retired now from doing that at the time. So I went through the British Association of Sport and Exercise Sciences supervised experience scheme. So you do 2 years of supervised experience I was with Professor David Fletcher, who was a doctor back then, and I would go and do a supervisory session at 7 a.m. and be in the classroom at 9. I would go and write a research paper, and he was an ex-swimmer. So he loved mornings, ex-footballers, we hate mornings. I used to go and study, do my academic research, do my sports psychology supervision, and then go and have a day job. You know, and I was also helping run their netball academy at the time, but just trying to always pack things in and start to build my experience base. Obviously, with Loughborough, you've got that density of world-class athletes in one place. So I was able to, you know, build up my athlete consultancy work to gain the experience I needed to get the accreditations. And I, at the time, passed all the accreditations. So I was a BASIS accredited sports scientist back then, which then got converted into a chartered scientist as the profession professionalised and went through the Royal Charter, because psychology has changed a lot over the last 2 decades in terms of how you train, how you develop your competencies, the regulatory requirements to, you know, to keep licenses up. Is very, very different than to where it was kind of 15, 20 years ago, which is a really, really good thing. Because we want athletes to have access to practitioners that are as qualified as the medical profession and, you know, and clinicians. So yeah, kind of in the early years, if you'd have asked me to be anything, I'd have wanted to be a footballer. And obviously not knowing I had a disability, because I wasn't diagnosed till I was in my 30s. I just knew I had lots of surgeries and lots of dislocations and lots of fractures. But taking all that competitive energy and trying to put it into my career is kind of how I kind of landed. So I knew I wanted to go to Loughborough. I had no idea I was then going to, you know, go and be a teacher and progress within education leadership.
So it's really, it's like, because you got yourself out there and you just, the doors just opened up, or you've discovered the doors yourself and you kind of, you know, knocked on them and you say, hey, you know, I want to try this, I want to try that. Because I've done, I recorded an episode, couple of episodes ago, I think, where I talked about loneliness, which is a big problem around the world today amongst young people. Of course, things like depression, etc. And you know, everything that you said is it's almost like my story as well with basketball. Because again, I had the same dream. Like I was, you know, moving in the right direction, won local championships. We played with playing Bursa as well. And done everything, got picked up by the Leicester Riders, and I'm like, yeah, getting there, etc. And as soon as I started, again, it's this bloody meniscus. I had like torn my meniscus, I've destroyed, but also I've torn my patella tendon as well. Yeah, and it was during practice. I was basically showing off because, I mean, you know my height, right? I'm not tall. I'm barely 6 feet or something. That I could still dunk. And that was like, I was the little guy that was the badass. So I was like, yeah, let me show you this dunk. And I did it. And my knee just, that was the end. It was horrible. Which kind of, you know, I described the issue as that, which is kind of a problem in sports. I'm sure you know that as well, is that as soon as you're out, you're out. It's like, I'm talking about the 90s, like everything, like whatever connections you had, you know, whatever clubs, whatever, it's like as if it didn't exist. It's like somehow you get out of this world and you're on your own, and your previous world just vanishes just like that. Hence, in sports, as I'm sure you're aware, but it's just for the listeners, like, I think globally, something like 4%, like, or under 4% of the global population has some kind of mental health problems. But in sports, it's almost 50%. You know, so out of thousands and thousands of athletes, 50% have mental health problems because of these sort of issues they've just talked about. So the advice I gave was that, you know, you should go out there, use your competitiveness. In my case, like I've got this competitive energy as well, like all athletes do, right? And I thought, okay, what can I do that could just satisfy that competitiveness? And my girlfriend at the time was now my wife. She told me, you know, why don't you become an entrepreneur? You wanted to be an entrepreneur post your retirement from the NBA. That was the original plan. She's like, why don't you just go for it? You know, it's competitive, it's crazy. And I'm like, yeah, actually, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And, you know, here I am. And so I think you know, the point you made is that it's to get yourself out there, which kind of solves the loneliness issue, etc. But this problem is really common among sports. And of course, as a sports psychologist, I'm sure you've probably met a lot of athletes that perhaps, you know, they were forced into retirement as a direct result of, you know, injury, etc. How do you help them get out of this sort of cycle that kind of drags them down this rabbit hole that, look, I can't do anything, I don't know anything, I'm useless, etc., etc.?
Yeah, so I think what you've described in terms of kind of, like you said, like in the 90s, it did feel that you were in or you were out. And I think that how the ecosystem around sport has changed in that time. I think there's much more trained, qualified, competent professionals now that are being paid in this space as athlete lifestyle advisors, as sports psychologists. You've got people that are focusing on high performance. So I think that now there's much more awareness across the industry, and listen, no industry is perfect. So this is not me saying that every sports organisation has this, because of course it's very different in grassroots sports, and there are some sports that they are funded to a significantly greater extent than others. We recognise that for governing bodies, they're coming under significant cost pressures, like a lot of industries are in the current climate. But, what we are seeing now is education programs for teenage athletes on recognising that if you're in high performance in anything, there's an element to which your personality and those perfectionist tendencies and that athletic identity. So the worst thing you want is when someone says, my name's Joe and I'm a footballer, because actually football shouldn't define you. And if it does, how do we give you the skills and the tools, and how do we support your family and friends, and how do the parents engage with you? Because, when you get in the car at the end of a fixture, if your parent says, did you win? Well, all of a sudden they've just attributed your performance to success and failure, as opposed to how did you play? So educating the parents on supporting athletes to have a really sound identity as an individual, and understand that to be a competitive athlete, there are certain behaviours that are really helpful, being focused and dedicated and punctual and trying hard and all of that. But this old notion of if you've lost a football game, you should sulk and have a tantrum for 2 days, it's just, that's just unhelpful. So it's really getting athletes, parents and support networks to consider helpful behaviours and helpful thought processes, as well as those that are unhelpful. And then when you need support, to ask for it. Because yes, of course, there are examples of athletes where they've suffered from a period of mental ill health. And I think what, isn't clear on the data is would they've experienced that if they weren't in sport. But what we do know is sport and physical activity have so many other health benefits on all-cause mortality. So, by having a better cardiovascular system and a better respiratory system, if you are physically active, never mind sport, you are absolutely giving yourself the best opportunity to not get preventable illnesses and certain types of cancer and diabetes. So I think there are so many benefits of being part of the world of sport, but absolutely every sport, we all have an obligation to work to make sure the athletes are supported as they transition through sport. And there are researchers and academics and companies, so entrepreneurs. We've got entrepreneurs at Loughborough doing things like the athlete place and doing wellbeing products and doing educational tools for clubs, athletes and parents, and indeed trying to make those more accessible at the grassroots level of the game. So the tech entrepreneurs are also using their sporting expertise to try and fill market gaps so that it isn't just for those that are in the professional contracted type sports.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And actually, you just reminded me of a conversation I had, I think, with one of the startup entrepreneurs in Loughborough University.
Joe, probably, yeah.
But the issue as well, because one of the biggest problems, I think in the event that where you and I spoke at, I mean, I asked that question with one of them, where the issue with the sports industry today is absolutely filled up with what I like to describe as bro science fitness apps, and it's crazy how they've been dominating the market for a long time. I mean, we talked about the 90s, it's probably since the 90s. And I'm just wondering, how do sort of more quote unquote legitimate health apps and sports app can proliferate the market and kind of, take away that attention, or rather take attention away from these pro science apps, and really educate the people properly? Because unfortunately, a lot of these bro science apps are promoted by celebrities, etc. So they've got pretty strong market dominance at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, it's through things like, so we do work hard to try and really collaborate with the industry. So we talk to partners like the Well HQ, who are working on female athlete education and female health more broadly, and saying, listen, you've got a brilliant group of practitioners that are going and educating the strength and conditioning coaches within women's football, as an example. But we've got the research that can really underpin to make sure that we're working collectively to say, at the point of source that a young person gets that information from, as the research changes over time, because research happens at a fixed point in time, very rarely do you get that golden piece of research that you can extrapolate out and it's causal and all the stuff that we know about research and statistics. But given that, just take women as an example, something like 6% of all research in sports science is on dedicated female-only samples.
Oh,
well, of
which
course,
is crazy.
That means there's 4% of stuff that we just don't know yet. And as we learn and as it grows over time, what we know in 2028 might be different, hopefully, to what we know in 2032. So I think it's about constantly being open-minded to get our entrepreneurs to update the science as it goes, to stop selling in things as like the truth and this is the answer, because actually bodies are individual. How you process a carbohydrate might be different to how I process a carbohydrate. I'm not a sports nutritionist, but just to give an example to illuminate,
Yes.
And how our somatotypes will be different. The hormone balance of every female, they will menstruate in a different way. They will have different pelvic hip angles that impact the knee joint. So I actually think that, similar to how we've seen the internet more broadly focus on, the best way I could describe it is anyone that went to university in 2000 probably had some form of like a learn zone or a Moodle where things were put online as a repository, and then Netflix comes along with that LXP and it's individualized, like, hey Joe, you might want to watch this tomorrow, do you want to continue watching this? Like, as the way we learn becomes more individualized, actually that's going to happen in sports science, and it's going to be much more tailored advice to that individual around their training methods, their recovery. It used to drive me crazy. I would sit as a lifeguard at Loughborough watching the pool, and I'd sit there wondering why a swimmer that's like Mark Foster, who's 6 foot whatever, who's a sprinter, is swimming the same number of lengths as the distant swimmer. And and obviously that's evolved over time. You look at how Mel Marsh will train Adam Peaty will be completely different how Andy Manley would train Dan Whiffin. But for us, I think if one app is selling this fixes all and this is how it's going to be, probably that's not going to be grounded in research and really credible to that individual. So I think people are becoming more equipped now. So I wear an Oura Ring as an example. I used to wear an Apple Watch. I want to try and learn a bit more about some of my metrics, but I absolutely accept that there's going to be an element of compromise in the data that I receive, and it's not always going to be perfect. And it might be a tool to guide some helpful behaviours. It might not always be right, but I think that there is so much information out there. How we support and educate people in a way that is practical and easy to understand, we as an industry collectively need to translate that research and enable people to make their own decisions on what works for them.
So is there an urgent call then that for the education sector to start teaching kids about these things from the very young age? Because even though I'm a biomedical scientist, but people kind of get a little bit surprised, even annoyed when I say that I'm very much against the idea that STEM subjects should be compulsory, because I think there are certain subjects that should be compulsory. I think in light of the world that we live in today, I think history needs to be compulsory. I think nutrition should be compulsory. Not necessarily the full biology or whatever, but like the basic biology, things like that help us understand our bodies. I mean, one thing I remember, actually, because you've talked a lot about hormones, and this actually reminded me of a lecture I had, and this is in 99, I think, or 98, I can't remember. But he was a professor of endocrinology at my university, and he told us at the time that, in his opinion, the healthcare system and the education system has failed the general population, because if people had just the basic understanding of the critical importance of our hormonal system and hormones in general, half of the food industry would have gone out of business. So, for instance, people, everybody knows, okay, if you eat too much sugar, it will spike your insulin, blah, blah, blah. But actually, it's more than that. Because when you spike insulin, it actually compromises your sex hormones, estrogen or testosterone. It increases your cortisol, which is your stress hormones. So there are much wider consequences of just having these, tiny, quote unquote, insulin spikes. So there's I think the education system needs to kind of probably revise itself now, because we have so much information, like you said, but sometimes having access to too much information is like accessing zero information, because it's so overwhelming for a lot of people.
Yeah, and for me, listen, I think having spent 17 years in the education sector, it's certainly not for me to tell the education sector what should be and shouldn't be compulsory. But what I do think is, because of the cost pressures and the challenges to the sector, I think it is a fair statement to say that there are significantly less children in 2024 being taught how to cook healthy, nutritious meals in a really practical way. You used to do food technology. That used to be a GCSE subject that was really common. That isn't as common now. I think the data will be able to be fact checked on that. But my understanding is that there are less food technology lessons happening across the country. And then also, I remember being at school and being taught, how to make a chocolate brownie, thinking, well, I don't want to eat that. I think I'm one of those lucky people that I actually don't have a sweet tooth. Now, listen, I absolutely would. I'd love a glass of wine or a little piece of cheese. So, nobody's perfect, but I just don't naturally have a sweet tooth, which has really helped me. I think particularly given, my training is so low loaded because of my joints, looking after my diet, is really important to my overall kind of health and well-being. But I do think, like we see now, I remember when I used to coach a netball academy at the college, and one of the chefs said, bring them into the kitchen. Let's teach them to make some risottos. Let's teach them to eat better. So, and that was only kind of, 10, 15 years ago and the athletes that were going into the kitchen were like, we've never done this before. What do you mean we're going to make a risotto? We can't make a risotto. And after an hour, they're like, oh, we can do that. So I feel like that not just nutrition education around, I think the large majority of the population understand that refined sugar is bad and certain types of fat are bad. I think, and I think a large number of the population know eat more, fresh vegetables, etc. But actually putting all that on a plate in a way that's affordable, in a way that you can do with very limited, you don't need a blender and a this and a that. Actually, what can you make with some pans and that's really practical and achievable? We're not doing enough of teaching people to cook healthy, balanced food. I think is something that would be a real added value across, across young people and many adults.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think the issue, talking about the food industry, is that the highly refined and processed foods are cheaper than
absolutely
fresh foods, which is I think is horrible. I think it's criminal, frankly, because I agree. I mean, my wife and I, well, because of our medical background, but also because of me as an athlete, it's like we cook 99% of the time, and our kids, like the only time our kids eat unhealthy food is when they go to school. So they get all the sweets or whatever from their friends. I'm like, but it's fine, because generally my general philosophy, and I can't remember actually even who, I think one of the coaches kind of was saying to us, look, if you're 80% healthy, you're allowed to be a bit naughty for 20% of the time. Yeah, so it's okay. Which is fine. But no, you're absolutely right. I think cooking your own food is definitely one skill that you should absolutely have nowadays. But the cost situation, of course, it's problematic. But I wanted to go back to actually another point that you alluded to as well, that the data that we've been collecting in the world of sports for quite a long time, I was pretty shocked. I mean, although I'm not shocked that effectively women are underrepresented in technology in one shape or form. Certainly in the world of AI and tech, I even interviewed Ida Tin, who's the mother of the femtech sector. We discussed the fact that, out of all of those billions, hundreds of billions of dollars that have been thrown at the tech sector and AI, etc., barely 2% of that represents female entrepreneurs. And that's not because there aren't many female entrepreneurs. I always say to people, there's a hell of a lot more than 2%, like a hell of a lot more.
I think I've met more than 2%.
Exactly. Well, so have I. I mean, it's. I think it's outrageous. I mean, to me, as far as I'm concerned, that's suppression, really. And Ida is one of those 1%, because her company raised over $100 million for her startup at the time. And we're just talking. This is 2020. Well, it was 2024 when I spoke to her about 2025. And for example, you mentioned that only 6% of the data used in sports represents women, but there are a lot of female athletes for like decades. So what happened to all that data? Did people just not collect them or something, or ignore them? I mean, what's going on?
Yeah, and I think, listen, I don't have a perfect answer. I can reflect on kind of what I've seen or what I've experienced. And I think that for some elements of it is convenient sampling. If you can grab hold of 8 of the same of someone. So if you've got a squad of, 20 100-metre sprinters that are male and 500-metre sprinters that are female, and you need 8 for your sample, it's easier to go to the 8 men than it is to go and get another athletics club to join in. So some of it will be, research is incredibly expensive. No university in this country is profiting from research. They're running their research probably at a cost. And listen, that's under the Royal Charter. We are here to provide societal solutions. That's not a fiscal or an economic argument. It's just the reality of, you've got to invest in your research. We do it for the public good and to serve. But it is expensive to do. Laboratories are expensive to hire. So I think sometimes it comes down to who can the academic get hold of. Sometimes it does come down to by study design at times. I remember doing exercise physiology in my sports science degree here. And I remember one of the second years saying to me at the start of semester 2, when they ask you to do the VO2 max, put your hand up and go first. And it was a running joke because back when I was a student, habits were very different. Wednesday night was the student night, and lots of our students, they don't drink, they make really good lifestyle choices. When I was a student, it was drinking culture was part of team sports. So you'd be hungover on a Thursday morning, and you've got a 4-hour physiology lab or whatever it was. So the last thing you want to do is go to VO2 max. And I think, I can't remember if I was hungover. I might have been. And I said to this second year, are you genuinely winding me up? They said, if you never listen to anything I say, go first. So when the lecturer says, who wants to do VO2 max? I was like, yeah, me. And all my mates are looking at me like, and I'm thinking, I've either been really, really stitched up or this is the best thing ever. The lecturer starts laughing and went, you spoke to a second year, didn't you? So I just had to do VO2 max as standard on the bike back then with the mask on and fill the bags. Week 2 was under heat conditions like sweat vests or whatever. And under the heat conditions, the thermometer needs to go somewhere. It's not your mouth. So sometimes the design of the study, women don't want to do that. So I think there's a balance. And listen, of course, there's an element of gender bias. Of course, there are barriers and there is disadvantage. And actually, there's a lot of male academics, and we need more female academics that are solving answers that are interesting, to them, and that are questions for female athletes. And the numbers of participation of female sport, they've boomed over the last kind of 5 years. But you think about that, 20 years ago, participation numbers were nowhere near where we've got. So we're now in a place where more women are doing sport. Sport is more accessible for women. We still have a long, long way to go. Listen, you go to a sports shop and say there's 100 men's products, you'll be lucky if there's 15 women's products. So there is still a huge way to go to get industry engaged, to get female role models. What Iona Maher's doing for rugby at the moment is phenomenal, and it's really going to help grow the game, and it's going to help support and be a really good role model for young women. So, I hope she carries on, being brilliant. I think my team play her in a couple of weeks, so I don't want her to win the game. I just hope she's carries on being brilliant. But, we have so there are some systemic issues and barriers to address, but equally, we also have to be really honest and say, sometimes the design of a study makes it something that you might be less comfortable with. My wife was asked to go and participate in a golf PhD biomechanics study on swing, and you are being filmed and you're in a sports bar and cycling shorts. So some people are really comfortable with that. Some people are less comfortable. And even when you do all the privacy and all the ethics, it's still not a study you're going to want to be part of if you've got any body image challenges or any, anxieties around that.
No, that's actually a very good point as well. Actually, in terms of the systematic side of it, because my daughter, she's only 13, but she inherited my sports genes. So she loves sports. She wants to get into athletics. She's a sprinter.
She's definitely come into Loughborough in 5 years then.
Well, she knows about Loughborough because I said to her, we used to go to Loughborough, it's like, but she actually said something to me that kind of really broke my heart a little bit. That her school is more convenient for boys than it is for girls. And she's like sometimes that she she wants to get ready, she wants to do her training and stuff, and then she wants to run to her class or whatever. And I told her, you know what, you should complain to your school. Because she said, if you're a boy, it's easy for you to just change and stuff like that and just, have a shower or whatever. But for girls, it's not that easy. But then they would expect it to be on time with the boys at a particular lesson or whatever. And that kind of got me thinking, because actually, no, she actually has a point. So the infrastructure is designed in favor of male athletes as well. So it's not just the study, but the whole infrastructure perhaps needs to change.
I think Brighton women are pioneering female fabric first construction, and to my knowledge, I think they're one of the few teams that really understand this. And someone asked me the other day, like, Joe, what do you mean by female fabric first? And I said, have you ever been to the physiotherapist? And they said yes. And I said, okay, picture any woman that you know, probably not me, and how many holes are in the physio bed? And they were like, oh, I get it. So how uncomfortable do you think that is for some women to be face down and having treatment on an injury? So this isn't just a sport issue. This is a broader societal issue. And then the other thing I'd be saying is, name me anyone, male or female, that wants to walk into a linoleum-lined changing room that stinks of mud and deep heat and has got 2 wooden slats for you to sit on and a little hook to hang. I mean, what are you going to hang on that? It's so small, I don't know. But, actually, we should be much more demanding around, let's make the changing room environment comfortable. There's no reason a space needs to look like a leisure centre from the 1970s. Just on our campus here, we did a refurbishment project on one of our hotels on campus, Burley Court, run by our fabulous team at Amargo. And we've got sports partners going, you know what they've done to reception? Could you do that to reception in our sports facilities? We're having those conversations of how do you make it a welcoming environment that looks nice the second you walk in, whereas how many places do you see with breeze blocks, white tiles, lino floors, and it smells like mud? And we can be better on that. So I think that, the standards of what young people are going to want to be in and be part of and want to accept is they want all of it to be included. This isn't, I've invited you to the party, but no one's invited you to dance. We need all of it. And that comes down to when you park your car. We are doing a project at the moment on campus. We put EV charging points in. Well, actually, we need to make more of those disability accessible spaces because, it was great. So we was thinking about our sustainability agenda, but we need to look at the intersections of all of that and bring it together. And when we're building a building, we should be looking at it through the lens of how is that accessible for our athletes, particularly our para and disability athletes? What do our female athletes think within that space? And how do we then also speak to our male athletes? Because, when we're talking to partners like, at the ECB or whatever, whether they're a female or a male cricketer, golf's really popular for cricketers. So how do we make sure some of the social environment around the sports spaces make you want to spend more time in that sports space and thinking really carefully? Like when the FA invested in St George's Park, they didn't just build however many football pitches in a hotel. They built an environment that is, a pleasure to relax and learn and train and be educated and recover in. And it's the whole group of that. We need to bring all of that together. So, but you're absolutely right. There are fundamentally pieces of equipment that are male by design for men. And we need to have more pieces of equipment that are female designed around, different body types.
And that goes beyond sports as well. I mean, I don't know if you saw the report that was published here in the UK. It was towards sort of the end of 2024 that they found that the healthcare system in the UK is systematically misogynistic. So we're literally talking about the entire NHS, which is not surprising, but at the same time, you would think surely we would have figured this out by now. And I'm just wondering, where is the failure here? Because one of the things that I want to do with this podcast is that I always try to challenge the narratives, because you hear the narratives, the quote unquote woke, right? Which I don't know what the hell that is personally. Like, it makes no sense to me. But for instance, I mean, I can picture somebody listening to what you just said and said, why do we need to waste our time worrying about, female only this, female? Back in the day, we used to do this, and back in the day, we were tougher. And more shockingly, you would find women that say that as well. They're like, oh, come on, back in the day, we girls didn't care about these things. Why should we care about that now? And, what's your message to people that think that way?
for me, and just to be clear, I absolutely don't think things should be female only. I think we should be thinking at the intersection of, if we're going to include everybody. So this isn't including someone at the expense of someone else. And that's why I was really careful when I said, a man doesn't want to work in a changing room with two wooden slats. And, compare what you see now.
I acknowledge that. It's not nice.
In a Premier League changing room or an NFL changing room, they're brilliant places. I'd love to be in those changing rooms. So no, I think that's the point. You are never, ever going to come up with a project where 1 billion people across the planet are all signed up and all happy. I think that we need to challenge ourselves as a society that when we do particular projects, we are thinking with diversity of thought and working really hard to consider more people to make those at least even better. This isn't a deficit model. This is where we are, and it's the reality of where we are. But if you talk to a lot of men that are going to take their family and young children to a women's football game, they're saying it's just a really different experience than when they go to a men's game. Now that doesn't mean a friend of mine or one of my cousins in Liverpool doesn't want to go and watch Liverpool men tomorrow, but if he's taking his young children to watch Liverpool women and they're getting a different experience, it's not an either or, and it can be for people, and that's okay. Listen, I was men's football.
Why do they think like that? Why do they feel that it's either or? Because I don't think, to be honest with you, I mean, I follow politics as a business person. I need to follow politics because, whatever nonsense they come up with can impact our industry and our company. But generally, I do hear when, for example, in America, they had this major complaint about DEI. Now, I have issues the way DEI has been deployed by companies because they didn't, it wasn't a genuine change. It was just a box ticking exercise, which turned into a complete joke, which kind of went against the whole point of DEI. And I kind of called this out. I think that's wrong. However, some people chose to politicize that. And I'm just wondering, why do people still, like everything, I know, like, for example, what you say, you didn't say it has to be women's only, but it's more about inclusion. It's about making sure that, everybody can be comfortable. Everybody can be happy. Men, women, children, boys, girls, right, etc. But some people still have that resistance. I mean, I know from your background in psychology, I know it's sports, but it's people's behaviors. But why do they? The question I suppose, what makes them feel so threatened? Is like that there's some kind of change that could actually benefit other people, but my God, they would still want to resist it. Why is this? Where does this kind of fear of change coming from, or this resistance, or this misunderstanding of the whole message coming from? Do you think?
I think whoever's able to answer that is probably going to run the next government. And I think that when you look at how our media is given to us, if you look at the diet and the menu of what's available across broadcast, across print, across different politicized agendas, and all of that, I think there's a tendency to feel like some people are in an echo chamber. Some people want to be outraged about stuff. Some people are venting for a whole host of reasons. Listen, I'm sure there's academics right now that study in my sociology departments that are ready to jump through the camera to say, Joe, please say this. I don't have the answer for that. I do sense that we've got to stop just focusing on single issues. We've lost a way of looking at just those values of human integrity and decency. So, and it's like, no one is going to come up with a solution that absolutely meets every religious box, every political box, everything. So all the agendas end up at cross purposes, and then we're all outraged. It's like, well, if we just focused on being respectful, being kind, human decency, having, and not, and understanding that sense of humours are a good outlet, and sometimes that doesn't always land, but using emotional intelligence, actually, what are the cross-cutting things that make human beings human and deliver a really rich experience? Because, and the phrase I've used is sometimes even people that are trying really hard with good intent to focus on inclusion agenda, they go sometimes so far down a rabbit hole. It's like, you can't have your inclusion cake and eat it, because by doing that over here, we've missed this and this and this, So I think these are really complex issues, and, absolutely, I'm sure there's lots of researchers that could give a really academic answer to that. I suppose my human answer is, if people really work really hard to treat people kindly, and listen, that doesn't mean you can't have a bad day. We all have them. None of us are perfect. We've all got to learn, we've all got testosterone, estrogen, tempers, whatever it is. But if in, like you said, 80-20, if 80% of the time you're trying really hard to listen to someone, be empathic and work together, then you're probably going to be a pretty good egg.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually, I called out Google. I mean, like I mentioned earlier about the DEI box ticking exercise. And I think the issue is like, this is when things went far to in the worst direction. I don't know if you've seen the news when Gemini was generated a black George Washington, like, you know, to so that it can be more equal. And this is the ridiculousness. And I think this has got to empowered, unfortunately, the wrong crowds, like that basically try to find whatever issues that divides people, etc. And I think this is, like I said, this is the balance. And when I talk, as you know, like with my company, we're always pushing for what we describe as ethical AI, you know, ethical innovation, human-centered. And companies, like some CEOs would come to me and say, well, I mean, yeah, that's virtue signaling. I said, no, I'm not talking about virtue signaling. It is literally, like you said, it's about understanding humanity in its very basic form. It's like thinking about what would happen if your algorithm messes up so badly, you know, to the impact that would have on the user. If that user is a child, what would happen? If that user has, you know, mental health issues, what would happen, etc. And the issue that we see with AI, which is the reason why I started this podcast again, the reason I kind of walked away from the whole VC nonsense, frankly, is that they don't think about that. Like, they literally don't. It's like, for example, a lot of the issues that we've seen, for example, with child mental health issues caused by accessing social media and the horrific stories that we had here in the UK, you know, the murder in Southport, etc. These are basically people, young people with mental health issues that have access to material that they should never access. But people in California, right, mostly men again, they think, yeah, it's fine. We didn't need to worry about that. And I actually had at the time of the recording of this episode, I had an interview with Professor Sarah Grimes. So she's a Canadian expert in the impact of digital tech on children. And the key point she highlighted to me, that because I thought at some point, like, how come children don't have any rights online, for example? And she said, oh, actually they do. It's just been ignored. So sometimes I think social media and the tech sector does have a responsibility to ensure that some of the messages that, you know, you've mentioned as well is prioritized in the research and development of the data side of things.
And engage with, you know, like UNESCO obviously has the UN Rights of the Child. You know, we chair the UNESCO group on, I think it's sport and physical activity and physical education. So Professor Richard Giulianati here is an expert, you know, within that space. And I think that the UN Rights of the Child are really important, generally globally adopted, but of course, you know, supporting the implementation on and as many programs as possible to work together and to do that. And I think it is about globally collaborating. You know, no one country or set of experts are going to have the right answer, but, you know, using things, you know, where we can globally get, you know, the thoughts of, you know, hundreds of countries around the table and drive change forward for the good and to protect young children, I think is a really important thing.
And sports actually is a big part of that. I mean, for me, the main reason I love sports, I think that it kind of breaks all of these divisive issues, doesn't it? It's kind of like all of the barriers. It I don't know why. I mean, actually, I should ask this as a fun question. I mean, what is it about sports that somehow divides these barriers? Because I never understood that. Because it's like, for me, it's like, I don't know, maybe it's a sports thing. Like, you know, I don't see an athlete as a, you know, female athlete or male athlete. It's more like a fellow athlete, full stop, right? It's like, there's that kind of special relationship. I don't know, is that our animal instincts or something like that somehow breaks these barriers naturally?
For me, sport at its best, because listen, you know, sport's got its challenges. Sport at its best is aspirational and it showcases the very peak of human endeavour. And I think if you look at the way the Olympics was set up, you know, and listen, we're not going into Olympic history, but if
that was in Paris, oh God, yeah.
Let's not. But if you just unpick the kind of, you know, the ethos of hard work and courage and teamwork and, you know, that spirit, you know, you should feel like in sport you're doing something that's bigger than yourself, that's for, and whether you're an individual athlete aiming for an Olympic medal or a world championship record, or whether you're a team athlete and doing that in a much more team-based environment, you know, sport is more than you as an individual, and it's pushing yourself at the peak of what you can achieve, and each of us has got a different, level of potential, whether that's genetics, whether that's talent, whether that's effort, all of that. So I think it gets you out of your comfort zone. And I think that's the area. It's like when you're out of your comfort zone and when you're attributing full effort and focus to whatever you do, for me, it's about high performance, because I think that the same way you feel in sport, an artist might feel when they do the work of their life, a musician might feel when they write the best song they've ever written, and they perform to a crowd of 100,000 people. So actually for me, the magic ingredient in sport is that piece around high performance. And in sports psychology, it's talked about performing to the upper range of your capability as consistently as you can and thoroughly enjoying the process.
Yes.
And if you captured that in anything that you do, you're going to be hopefully really fulfilled. And I think it's about fulfillment. I've worked really hard at that. And whether I've met it or I've just felt short, I've put everything I've got into it. And you take that mindset for a young child and apply it to any industry, they're going to be successful.
I mean, that's the point I learned. Actually, I talked about in that video as well, where I shared my personal experience of loneliness, etc. It's about what I learned from sports is being comfortable outside your comfort zone. And I think this is the issue that a lot of people can't handle. Like you reach the peak of your comfort zone and you're like, okay, I can't go any further. But going through that is really hard. But once you figure out a way to feel comfortable going outside your comfort zone, somehow I found it liberating. It's like, I'm like, hey, nothing can stop me. But not in a sort of arrogant way, but it's like, you know what? I want to try that. I don't mind, right? I want to learn a new language. Why not? I mean, I'm dyslexic, but hey, I don't care. I want to read the Lord of the Rings books. And I did, right? It took me 3 years or something, but hey, I did it. But it's beyond sports, I think. I mean, sports kind of teaches you that self-belief. That's why I always encourage people, just do something. You don't have to be a professional athlete. Just
100%.
Go for a walk, go for a run, go for a swim, and it just give yourself a few challenges here and there, and it's like it's amazingly rewarding.
Yeah, 100%. Movement is medicine, and if we can get more people more active, it's going to be preventative for health, and it's going to support health systems across the world. I think, and like say, sport, obviously, people that are competitive may get injured, but for just that general movement of physical activity and hitting that metric of moderate to vigorous physical activity for, the number of minutes as appropriate to age group is, if you could package that as medicine, it'd be like the top selling drug in the world. So I think, that human potential, physical movement, and application of effort into whatever you do is really, really important.
Do you think sports is being promoted in the right way? Because I feel we need to do a bit more. Because I think when you talk about sport, the automatic thought process is becoming a pro athlete. So with my kids, for example, I said to them, look, do sports, but you don't have to become a pro, because they're two different things. I mean, I always tell people, there's a huge difference, for instance, being, playing basketball because you love basketball, and being a professional basketball player. That's two totally different things. Because certainly from my experience, right? Like you would spend 8 hours training, 70% of that is not basketball. It's in the gym, right? Physiotherapy and loads of other things that you've got to do. And part of that is basketball, but then you have to add traveling to matches, etc. There's so much more in there. And that's not fun unless you absolutely love the sport.
And listen, you want people to be ambitious and you want them to dream big, but let's think about the reality of, if you're a boy, because I know the boy data, not the female data yet. So if you're a young boy in the UK, the chance of you becoming a Premier League footballer is something like 0.0062%. There's like 3.3 million people playing football, affiliated or non-affiliated, could be 3.6 across the country on any given week.
Yeah.
And in the Premier League, they're allowed a squad of however many players for this number of teams. So, and those players are coming in from all over the world. So if you're born in the UK today, so you want people to dream and be passionate, but you also want to be pragmatic, and balanced, because so many more people play football for fun than are ever going to be paid. I think there's 3,000 professional contracts in football, something like across League 2, League 1, the Championship. We're in a population of 60 million people. You wouldn't put a lottery ticket on that. So I think sports have got better at educating at the grassroots level and the coaches around managing expectation, not tempering dreams, but managing expectation of, you would need to be a rounded individual. You need to go and get your education. You need to, balance, and you need to have fun while you're doing it. I think that's really important.
And the one thing that I think, again, because I speak, when I talk about schools, I speak from my kids' experience and sort of my friends as well. Like, one thing that schools, I think they need to do more of is, of course, is to encourage kids to play sports, whether it's not about being a pro or something. But I think the one thing they need to teach them as well is the value of losing. Because one of the things about you learn in sports is that when you lose, it's not the end of the world. That failure is actually okay, because that allows you then to find different ways to move forward and improve, or even switch sports. Like, maybe that's not the right thing for you, and instead of wasting your time life doing the thing that you don't like or you're not good at, you can actually discover another opportunity that is actually fantastic for you. I mean, what's your thoughts on that as a final thing?
Yeah, well, I think it's two things, actually. I think at Loughborough we have a philosophy around winning with dignity and losing with grace. I think you need to teach people how to win as well. Nobody likes, someone that's a gloater. So I think for me, it's about back to the human conditions and values: win with dignity, lose with grace. And it's only failure if you didn't learn from it. If you take that as a take home message, then it's going to significantly add to your fun and enjoyment of sport.
No, sounds great. But Joe, if people want to find out more about the work that you do and your events, etc., where can they go?
Absolutely. So Loughborough University comes up as the first search on Google, and our website is www.lboro.ac.uk. We offer a range of undergraduate, postgraduate courses for both UK and international students, and we're world number 1 for sport research subjects. Remember, I said you've got to do that with real dignity. So that's just, I kind of can't not say that. But yeah, we'd be delighted to hear from you.
And as always, listeners, all the links are in the description as usual. But Joe, thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And hopefully I will have another chat again. There's so much to talk about, it's sure.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, listeners.
Right. Thanks a lot, Joe. Take care. Well, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. And what a lovely quote to end this discussion with. Win with dignity, lose with grace. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, the rules of sports and philosophies can be applied in everything. This is, in fact, a quote that can be applied in entrepreneurship as well. Because like in sports, there's a much higher chances of you losing than winning. And therefore, you do what it takes to win. But that does not mean that you, as soon as you step on the court, you're just going to win. You are going to end up losing a few things here and there. But you have to learn from these mistakes, learn from these losses, learn from these failures, and move forward. And if anybody ever tells you that they've never failed, or that they've never, change their plans, or like in the world of tech, we say the word pivot, where you, as a business, you pivot in order to try a different direction. Otherwise you die, so to speak. It's, this is completely for the birds. It's not real. Trust me on that. Failure is not something that you should run away from, but that does not mean that you should go out there and fail intentionally. Yeah. Aim for win, but you absolutely need to expect a few losses and failures here and there. And that is absolutely okay. Right? So fail with grace. So I hope you guys walk away from this discussion feeling a little bit more inspired. And as always, if you've got any questions that you want me to pass on to the guests, or you want to ask me directly, you can DM me on LinkedIn. So those of you who follow me do that already. So I really thank you for that. But also you can email us at editors@ceoretort.com. And also, as usual, make sure you subscribe and like and share all that lovely stuff. It makes a massive difference to the algorithms. And I also been told recently that our rankings on Spotify are kind of starting to go up a little bit, which is nice. And all you've got to do apparently is something that can take you 3 seconds. And that is follow and rate the show. Make sure you rate the show. You can't just follow. That doesn't count. You have to follow and rate the show. Now, if you love it, please give us 5 stars. I mean, that would be nice, but you guys decide whatever the rating is suitable. But follow, rate. I think it's the same on Apple Podcasts as well. I'm still learning this thing, guys. But certainly on YouTube, subscribe, like, share. Again, 3 seconds, right? 1 action per second. Makes a massive difference. I really appreciate that, guys. But also, as a way of supporting this podcast, you can check out our sponsors and become a founding member. One of the things that we're working on now is organizing live events, virtual events at the beginning, and eventually maybe face-to-face as well. But this is only available to founding members, which you can find out at ceoretort.com/support. And this is just one way of supporting our independence and making sure that in the current precarious world of politics, where apparently freedom of speech is different from the actual freedom of speech, there's a very high chance that people like me would be shut down. I have no idea. But the point is, it's very important that we keep this conversation going. This is why I've got my own platform, building all of this on, to make sure that nobody can shut us down and we can continue our discussions, our conversations as candidly and as openly as possible. So guys, stay positive, stay strong, do what it takes, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.